difference so long as they treat everyone the same way. Yeah?
Out of curiosity, what do you think is going to happen next year in February? Is insurance rates going to rise so high that
No.
people can afford it? Or is it going to
Everywhere else in the world, the insurance has to do this.
Actually, the
It's
prices are
only in
going
this
to
country.
drop because we had this talk in our department, and they're
the price of
saying it's going to
insurance
be.
going to drop and
Yeah,
they're going to
because
cover
it's going to be.
everyone with pre-existing conditions?
Yes,
Yeah.
because it's going to be so competitive that they're going to drop the prices so that the people pick them
Remember,
over the other ones.
everybody has to compete with everybody for everyone to be covered. And that means that there's going to be
More people than there
yeah,
are.
more people. But everywhere else in the world, they don't, pre-existing conditions are covered. Only in the United States is this happening.
So all the places like Planned Parenthood, they only test for HIV-1?
Right. But,
But why don't they ever say it though?
because most people don't even know.
Oh.
So anyway, what do we know about HIV number 2? And the answer is not much, sadly. We don't know much at all because, one, it doesn't hit people in the United States, so how much research do we do on it? Hardly anything.
Until it becomes an issue.
That's the way Americans are. If it doesn't hurt us, we don't care. And so very little research is done on HIV number 2. There's just a couple things you need to know. First, it was discovered by Brune Bizinet at the Institut Pasteur. What was she doing? She was looking at West Africans that had symptoms of AIDS but tested negative on HIV-1 test. She isolated it. They patented it. It is a zoonosis from a different animal. It is from the sooty mangabe monkey, not chimpanzee. And the way we found this out was one of the very first people ever found to be infected with it. They keep them like we keep cats. They keep these little sooty mangabe monkeys as pets. And the man and his sooty mangabe pet had the same virus, and it was from scratching. They were biting and scratching, and blood transmitted the disease from one to the other. So it's from a sooty mangabe monkey, not a chimpanzee. It causes 1/3 of it outside the North America, and we think it's less fulminating. Anybody know what less fulminating is? Not as harsh, it doesn't kill you as quickly. So instead of killing you in 15 years, it takes 25. It takes longer, but nobody knows for sure because we don't do much research on it. Okay, this we've already been over. The disease has been called GRID, Slim disease, and AIDS. Bowler is the guy who gave it the name AIDS. The virus, first LAV, second HTLV-3, ARV by the University of California, and finally, because of the misbehavior by both groups, they took it away from both. By the way, they declared Robert Gallo would never get a Nobel Prize because he really was scum. All right, by the way, Congress investigated him, and when they came to the conclusion he had intentionally misappropriated it, but in the typical American way, he was allowed to resign with a full pension and set up his own laboratory with millions of dollars at the University of Maryland. So once Congress heard that he had misappropriated, instead of admitting it, they just tabled the motion and allowed him to resign and go about his business. Okay, so these are the molecular weight genes. These are the proteins in HIV-1. Why do I tell you this? Because if you go get an HIV-1 test, and remember they used to take blood and then run the ELISA, and if you were borderline or positive, they would run it again. And if you were borderline or positive, it had to go to another test called a Western blot for confirmation. Now, they do the ELISA on a stick, the one that they give you that sticks in your mouth that looks like a lollipop, or they do the little pin-prick one that is, again, still basically an ELISA. Everything is still confirmed by the Western blot. And the Western blot looks at antibodies to the individual proteins that make up HIV-1. And the Western blot, there is a little bit of a problem with it, and that is that the Asian flu and pregnancy both produce one of these proteins. The Asian flu can have a P27 or a P24. And pregnancy can have a P55. Now, what does this mean? It means a protein that weighs 55,000 molecular weight units. And so when they first, remember, I don't know if you remember, but I remember when they said that everybody in the military was going to be tested for HIV. And the reason they did this was to get huge numbers of people tested to see if there were any problems with the test. And so when they did this, they found, at that time, if you were positive on the ELISA twice and had any one of these bands, you were considered infected with HIV. And they came up with a whole bunch of those Top Gun pilots in San Diego for the Navy. They had 7 of them that tested positive. And they went down and investigated, and it made no sense. They were not gay, they were not sluts, they were not shooting up drugs. It made absolutely no sense at all that they had a P24. So they went back and retested them 4 months later. You know, that's what they do in medicine. You get a funky result, you just wait a while and retest. And they retest them, and it went away. And then they looked on their medical records, and they'd all had an Asian flu. So then they had some pregnant women come up positive. So finally, they redesigned the test, and to be positive, you have to have one borderline or positive ELISA, another borderline or positive ELISA. In other words, it's always done twice. And a Western blot with 3 bands that are typical of HIV-1. Now, what if you have a borderline or positive ELISA, again you have a borderline or positive ELISA, and you have 1 band? They tell you you are indeterminate. Come back for further testing in 90 days. If you have 2 bands, they say come back for further testing in 60 to 90 days. The only time you are confirmed infected is if you have 2 ELISAs that are borderline or positive and a Western blot with how many bands? 3. Now, which bands show up first? When you're walking toward the virus, the first thing you're going to see is the envelope. So remember, the envelope shows up first. And the envelope is the 41, the 110, 120, and the 160. So these show up first. You can actually tell how long somebody has been infected by how many bands they have. So if they only have these 3, and remember what your immune system is ripping the virus apart all the time. So the first thing that your body makes antibodies to is the envelope, and then it rips it open and it makes it to the core protein. So these 3, then these, and then last the others. So if a person has the glycoproteins or the envelope proteins and the core, they are early in infection. If they have other bands, then they have been infected quite some time. Yeah?
What if you're in the window of HIV?
In your window, this is the window. When you have borderline or positive and you have 1 or 2 bands, you're said to be indeterminate or in the window.
You said, when you said if it's inside the organisms.
Well, what happens when your body attacks the virus is at first it makes antibodies against the outside, and then it rips it open, and that's the P24 around the gene.
So it's older if it's inside.
No, it's older if it makes antibodies to other proteins other than the outside or the core. Okay, so we've run out, and we will finish this next time. Did you hit the button also? Yes. If you're a checker, come up front and let me sign. And cover, bring me a sharpie if you have it.
Daryl.